Hello there, sword friends. Today I had my camera out and I was playing with lenses in the sunlight, and as you may notice I am a bit congested, but I thought I would share a little bit about some Hamon information. Hamon as the line that is created as a sword is heat treated. Sometimes it's referred to as a tempera line, even though our good friend John Andresen has said it's not related to the tempering process. It's related to the quench of a sword as it's heat treated. In any case, I am going to tell you a little bit about some different styles of Hamon, and the first is a Hamon off a Skyjiro Take, or I think it's called Take. I called it the Take Your Money Katana, but it was a relatively expensive Skyjiro sword, and I thought it was a really good example of a Hamon out of a sword in China. But more to the point, I think somebody might look at this sword and say symptomatically it is very clearly a sword out of China. It has many of the same types of patterns that you would see, or at least it seems characteristic or indicative of something that would come out of China, albeit be a good or a better example. This is supposed to be a laminated blade as well as a differentially heat-treated blade as well as a folded blade. So it has all of those different characteristics going on inside of it, and I'll try to outline each one of them. So as you see this blade move across the screen, what you're going to see is what looks like a wood grain pattern in the surface of the steel. Now this wood grain pattern goes above this kind of wavy, cloudy line, and it goes all the way to the edge, and you kind of lose it in the top where it's mirror polished. A lot of times that Hada, that folded look, is lost when something has a really mirror shine to it. It requires some sort of etching or some sort of process anyway to bring out that wood grain pattern. Now I would call this, in the Skyjiro Katana, a wood grain pattern that is indicative of something you would see in China. It is very Skyjiro, as though if I saw this I wouldn't necessarily be able to say it is from Skyjiro, but it does look like it is from a forge in China. At least that's the impression I get. Dynasty Forge, Hanwei, many other forges out of China seem to have folding patterns, or at least a general look that seems similar. Again, albeit that this one is perhaps better. And just along the hot, you can kind of make out in some spots that there is just this very slight, it's like a millimeter long where the lamination line is. If this is a laminated blade, in fact, which I believe it's advertised correctly, you can kind of see where that forge weld takes place, just along the very last millimeter of the edge in some spots, which means, maybe it's not the hardest steel in all spots on the sword. In any case, this is a very pretty sword, and I just thought that this Hamon was indicative of a Chinese style blade, or a blade made in China katana, folded, differentially heat treated blade made in China, and it may give you some prospect on what to look for. The next blade is a katana from Pavel Bolf, and he is a custom smith out of the Czech Republic that makes swords in a somewhat unique way. Now this is a folded blade, and it has some interesting heat treatment effects. Now Pavel Bolf, from my understanding, he makes his own steel in a lot of cases, though I don't know if he made his own steel in this blade. I don't know if it's a laminated blade or just a folded steel blade that was then differentially heat treated. And I've also heard that he heat treats his blade without the use of clay. Anyway, the point is that this blade is made outside of Japan as well, but is not Chinese. Now, many different custom smiths will have different patterns, different hadas, different ways of showing their folded steel. A lot of people that make custom swords don't end up laminating them, so there's not multiple forge welds that take place of different types of steel. There's folding a steel, and then there's laminating. Those are different processes, and you don't always have to have one or the other, in fact. Anyway, this is a Pavel Bolf blade, and it's unique in the sense that he does his things his own way, and many smiths do. This is not necessarily how a Hada or a Hamon is going to look if it's a sword that is made not in China and not in Japan. This one's made, I believe, in the Czech Republic, and it's a unique blade. But I thought it was interesting to show another blade in the higher end spectrum, or at least more expensive spectrum. The Skyjiro blade was like a $3,200 blade. Pavel Bolf's blades are a little more expensive than that, often if they're mounted and finished as well. But this is an example of a smith outside of China, outside of Japan, making custom swords, and just a different example of what you might see in a Hamon on a custom sword. Again, though, there's a ton of variety here. when I say that the Skydro example is something that has a lot of characteristics that I would say are made in China, this blade from Pavel Wolf doesn't tell me that it's anything other than Pavel Wolf's work. The next example I have is an antique blade, a Nihonto blade, and you can see some of the detail in this blade. Now this blade is older and there's a story along with it, and I don't really want to say what it is right now. But in a nutshell, it is an antique Japanese blade. It's Nihonto, it's made in Japan, it's a older sword, and it's in a state of disarray. There are some there's flaws in the blade. The Hamon it's basically a diminished version of whatever it likely was in the past. However, it's still long and pretty and has a lot of character and a lot to study, and I enjoy the blade. In any case, it's an idea of what you might expect to see in some examples of Nihonto, though Nihonto can also run the gambit. There's books and a lot of literature, and it's a very mature hobby if you're interested to see all of the different characteristics that are inside a sword, all the different names. But again, they can run the gambit in terms of Hada and patterns and things you might see. But this is just an example of another sword, another Hamon pattern, and really an example of something that you would look at this and say, well, this is at least Nihonto. This is a Japanese blade and Japanese-made antique blade. Now, I've talked a little bit about Hadas and Hamons and patterns, but in the realm of Japanese sword, at least in the modern context, there are also through-hardened blades that have really no character. And I'm showing a Chris cutlery blade from a long time ago. This is actually mounted onto a Highlander sword that I happen to have around right now. And it's a particularly ugly example of a modern production sword in that it is hollow ground. There are a lot of lines from the or grinding marks or milling marks, if you will, from the process of creating the sword. And it's effectively, it's a through-hardened blade. It's not, it doesn't have a Hamon, it doesn't have a Hada. It's a steel that is homogeneous in that it's not folded, there's no artistic embellishments there, and the pattern that you see on the surface of the steel isn't a Hada. That's just milling marks from making the sword, as much as I suppose a Hada is marks from making the sword as well. But this is from a mill or a machine or a tool of some sort in creating the sword. And it doesn't have all of the same effects that a traditional sword might have. It doesn't have the wood grain pattern. It's not folded. It's a homogeneous type of steel, and it's tempered in such a way that there is no line or wavy pattern or difference in the crystalline structure on the surface that's visible anyway. The next example is one from Swords of the Northshire, a blade that I recently received to review, and it is, well, a 1095 through-hardened blade, or at least that is what is advertised to be. But you can see that it has a Hamon, and the interesting bit to note about this is that this Hamon is not real. It's just an aesthetic embellishment that is attached onto the sword so that it looks mean and it looks like a katana. It gives you the impression that it is, in fact, a differentially hardened blade, but in fact it is not a differentially hardened blade. It's just an etched surface that gives one the impression of differential hardness, or that characteristic that's often associated with Japanese style swords, and that it has a Hamon. It has that scary white wavy line that looks daunting and scary and like you don't want to have it poked inside you. So anyway, this is actually a through-hardened blade like the previous one, though the surfaces are flattened. It doesn't have the milling marks. It's much cleaner looking, and it's been embellished with this etched pattern on top of it that gives the impression of a differential hardening, but it's not done. And this is it's much less expensive, I believe, to do this. I really don't know exactly why. It seems like another process, but in any case, it is often less expensive to have a through-hardened blade with a etched Hamon or some sort of etched embellishment on it than it is to have a differentially hardened blade with a really nice polish that brings out those characteristics. Now, I've talked about lamination, folding, differential heat treatment, and all of those are unique enough things that you can have one or the other. You could have a folded blade that is through-hardened. You could have a differentially hardened blade that is folded. You could have a differentially hardened blade that is laminated and through-hardened, or heat-treated as a through-hardened blade. You can kind of mix and match the two. They'll all perform their own unique or have their own unique aesthetic characteristics and embellishments and cool stuff to look at and things to appreciate. Anyway, I just thought I would talk about these 5 examples that I had while I had my camera out and was playing with lenses. I hope you've enjoyed just a quick video, sword porn, if you will, Hamons, Hadas, differential heat treatment, through hardening, and some examples. As always, cheers, and thanks for watching.